So back in 2012, in late 2012, November, a guy named Barnaby Jack gave a presentation at an Australian security conference where he said, you know, I've been looking at implanted defibrillators, and these are devices, if you have a dicky heart that tends to be arrhythmic and sometimes stops for no good reason, they cut you open, they spread your ribs, they open your chest cavity, and they attach this device to your heart, and they stitch you back up again. And it's a computer connected to a battery. And the computer waits for your heart to become arrhythmic, and when it becomes arrhythmic, it administers a shock to put it back into rhythm. And these devices have a wireless interface because doctors want to find out what they're doing. They want to read the telemetry off of them. And they also want to be able to update them if they're doing the wrong thing, or if they've got some new software for them that unlocks a new feature. And what Barnaby Jack discovered was that this wireless interface wasn't very well secured. In fact, it was very poorly secured. He could reprogram it from 30 feet away. And he could reprogram it to do lots of things. One of the more interesting ones was he could reprogram it to scan as you walk around for other people with the same kind of implanted defibrillator and reprogram their defibrillators. So that's Act 1. Act 2 is he could cause the defibrillator to deliver lethal shocks at some point in the future or random intervals or whatever. Knowing what your devices are doing is an important thing because we live in a world that is increasingly made of computers. We have computers we put in our bodies. You know, if you're a member of the Walkman generation because you're my age, or a member of the iPod generation because you're 10 or 20 years younger, there's one sure thing, which is that if you live long enough, you will lose enough of your hearing that you'll end up with a prosthesis because we're all going to go deaf from our headphones. And, you know, maybe you'll end up with some kind of artisanal, hand-built transistor, oldie, worldly steampunk hearing aid. But chances are what you're going to get is a computer you put in your body. And that computer is going to be a device that will hear everything you hear, that will be able to selectively stop you from hearing the things that you hear, or will be able to make you hear things that aren't there. Knowing what our computers are doing is probably the most important thing, the issue that we have for a future in which we are free and in which we are able to conduct our lives well. So, when I wrote the book, Homeland, if I can just borrow your copy there, when I wrote this book, Homeland, I knew that one of the things I wanted to do with it was illustrate a next-generation political campaign, one that was built on getting campaign donations and getting votes from individuals rather than going to major donors or corporations. Because I figured that lawmakers who had to depend on individuals who voted for them and not major funders that allowed them to convince people to vote for them, that those lawmakers would be better representatives. And I wrote around to a lot of people I knew who worked on next generation campaigns, you know, people who were Democratic strategists and Republican strategists, and none of the stuff that I got back from them really was directly on point. But I wrote to Aaron Swartz too, because I knew that he built some of that anti-PIFA, anti-SOFA stuff. And I said, like, you wouldn't have any ideas, like just some bullet points. Let me know what you've got. And an hour later, he fired back an email that was essentially like a complete requirements document for what he called a vote generating machine that would use the power of people who believe passionately in causes to get out enough votes that you could substitute for power and money. It was great. It was like so great that it was shovel ready. I could just paste it straight into the document as I was going. All but the last, are you okay? Great. All but those chairs are a bit treacherous. All but the last sentence, which was, I've got to go. I should probably go start building this now. The last code check-in he did at GitHub was on a project that was related to that. So he was clearly, this was something that was very helpful to me, but also that got him thinking, and maybe it'll get you thinking too. Certainly lots of people who read the book in manuscript and since have written to me and said, is anybody building this? Because this sounds good. But the other thing I knew I wanted was a couple of afterwards. So the little brother, the first book, had two afterwards, one from Bunny Wang, who broke the security on the Xbox and made it so you could install your own software on it. And the other was from Bruce Schneier's, a well-respected security expert. And I knew I wanted two more for this, so I asked Jacob Applebaum, who works with WikiLeaks and with the Tor project, if he would contribute one, and I asked Aaron for one. And I said to Aaron, write me a letter to a kid like you, a bright kid who's like maybe 14 or 15 today, and tell that kid what you think they should know, what you think she should know about the world that she's living in now and the world that she can create tomorrow. And he sent me back really, again, something pretty shovel-ready. And I'm going to read a little bit right now. And then we'll be almost done, and we can take your questions. This is from Aaron's afterward. I know it's easy to feel like you're powerless, like there's nothing you can do to slow down or stop the system, like all the calls are made by shadowy and powerful forces far outside your control. I feel that way too sometimes, but it just isn't true. A little over a year ago, a friend called to tell me about an obscure bill he'd heard of called the Combating Online Infringement Act, Online Infringement and Counterfeiting Act, or COICA. As I read the bill, I began to get more and more worried. Under its provisions, the government would be allowed to censor websites it didn't like without so much as a trial. It would be the first time the US government was given the power to censor its citizens' access to the net. The bill had been introduced just a day or two ago, but it already had a couple of dozen senators co-sponsoring it. And despite there never having been any debate, it was already scheduled for a vote in just a few more days. Nobody had ever reported on it, but that was the point. They wanted to rush this thing through before anyone noticed. Luckily, my friend noticed. We stayed up all weekend and launched a website explaining what the bill did, with a petition you could sign opposing it that would then look up the phone numbers for your representatives. We told a few friends about it, and they told a few friends about it, and within a couple of days we had over 200,000 people on our petition. It was incredible. Well, the people pushing the bill didn't stop. They'd spent literally tens of millions of dollars lobbying for it. The head of every major media company flew out to Washington, D.C., and met with the president's chief of staff to politely remind him of the millions of dollars they'd donated to the president's campaign, and to explain what they wanted. The only thing they wanted was for this bill to pass. But the public pressure kept on building. To try to throw people off the trail, they kept changing the name of the bill. They called it PIPA and SOPA, and even the E-Parasites Act. But no matter what they called it, more and more people kept telling their friends about it and getting more and more people opposed. Soon, the signers on our petition stretched into the million. We managed to stall them for over a year through various tactics, but they realized that if they waited much longer, they might never get their chance to pass this bill. So they scheduled it for a vote first thing after they got back from winter break. But while members of Congress were off on winter break, holding town halls and public meetings back home, people started visiting them. Across the country, members started getting asked by their constituents why they were supporting that nasty internet censorship bill. And members started getting scared, some of them going so far as to respond by attacking me. But it wasn't about me anymore. It was never about me. From the beginning, it was about citizens taking things into their own hands, making YouTube videos and writing songs opposing the bill, making graphs that showed how much money the bill's co-sponsors had received from the industries pushing for it, and organizing boycotts, putting pressure on the companies who'd endorsed it. And it worked. It took the bill from a political non-issue that was poised to pass unanimously to a toxic football no one wanted to touch. Even the bill's co-sponsors started rushing to issue statements opposing it. Boy, were those media moguls pissed. This is not how the system is supposed to work. A ragtag bunch of kids just doesn't stop one of the most powerful forces in Washington by typing on their laptops. But it did happen, and you can make it happen again. The system is changing. Thanks to the internet, everyday people can learn about and organize around an issue, even if the system is determined to ignore it. Now, maybe we won't win every time. This is real life after all. But we finally have a chance. But it only works if you take part. So that's what Aaron wrote. And you can take part. We have people from the Electronic Frontier Foundation here tonight. There's also the group that Aaron helped found, Demand Progress. There's the Free Software Foundation, the Software Freedom Law Center. In fact, the amazing thing is how many different groups there are and how many different ways there are to help. And the folks from EFF can give you some tips on that. And increasingly, we have what I think we were missing 15 years ago when I started getting involved in this stuff. which is a smooth spectrum of ways that you can get involved, from something as little as just getting on a mailing list that will tell you when it's time to send an email that makes that difference, to all the way up to being a full-time volunteer, someone who goes and knocks on doors or participates in putting candidates on the spot when the election debates are being held and so on, all the way up and down the curve. Because this is it, right? This is the future that we are building. That future is going to be about whether the devices listen to us when we talk to them and do what we say, or whether they tell us what to do. And it's really, you know, it doesn't take a science fiction writer to know that the difference between a good future and a bad one is whether the machines obey you or whether they push you around, right? So the last thing I'm going to talk about, and this is very brief, is not something that I'm by any means an expert on, but when I talked to Aaron's family and I said I was coming out to talk about the book and about the stuff that Aaron helped me with, I told them I'd talk about this too, and that's suicide and depression, because many of us have experienced depression, many of us have experienced serious depression. Some of us were in situations like Aaron was in, where we faced some pretty big crises, and of course facing a big crisis is a pretty good reason to feel pretty bad. But some of us have felt so low that we thought we would never see the light again. I've certainly felt that way. And it's hard to talk about when it happens, and it's sometimes hard to listen to when it happens. We live in a time when we know an awful lot about what one another are doing. I can watch your Git check-ins and find out what code you're writing. I can watch your Foursquare check-ins and find out where you are. I can watch your Instagram feed and know an awful lot about what you're eating. But I don't generally find out an awful lot about how you feel unless I ask, unless I talk to you. And we don't talk about it much, especially in tech. And in tech, Aaron's just the latest in a recent string of suicides from people who had good reasons sometimes to feel bad, but whose problems were not solved by committing suicide. You can't A/B test suicide. You can't iterate suicide. You don't get to decide that suicide didn't solve your problem, so you're going to have to refine your approach and try again. That's it. Suicide's the end of it. If Aaron had called me from Brooklyn, I would have told him what I'm about to tell you, because maybe it's something that you will think of in a moment of extremis, or maybe it's something that you'll get a chance to tell someone in a moment of extremis. I'm sure that I'm not the only one who would have told Aaron this. I'm sure any of his friends would have told him this if he'd reached out then. Whatever problems he was facing, killing himself certainly didn't solve them. Whatever problems he was facing, they will now go unsolved forever. Excuse me. If he was lonely, he will never again be embraced by his friends. If he despaired of the fight, he would never again rally his comrades with his strategies and leadership. If he was soaring, he would never have the chance to feel happy again. So I know it's kind of a down note to end it on, but I hope that the up note that you can take from that is that taking care of one another is something we can use computers to do too. And I hope you will. Thank you.